Hi, my name is Kim Izzarelli, and this is Insights with Kim Izzarelli. Today I'm joined by E.J. McMahon. He's the Senior Fellow at the Empire Center for New York State Policy. And thank you for coming on the show today.
You're welcome.
All right. E.J. and Empire Center recently put out, you can get a shot of that, the taking a longer view of our local budgets, really examining long-term budgeting for municipalities and school districts across the state. And EJ, I was really alarmed when I read this that only 5 of New York's 80 largest counties, municipalities, and school districts have long-term budgets other than New York City. Is that really true? They have not projected past a year.
Well, only 5 of them publish and make use of publicly a long-term financial plan that goes out more than a year. I think a lot of sizable municipalities and counties and school districts keep, as a matter of internal planning, they keep multi-year plans, which are very useful, but they don't share them with the public. Now they offer a variety of reasons and excuses for not doing that, but I think it would really benefit the public and lead to a better discussion among taxpayers and elected officials as to what the options were going forward if people knew what things look like just down the road. I liken the current situation is like driving along a secondary road in the country at dusk with your parking lights on. So you're going along at 55 miles an hour down one of those 2-lane roads with a double line down the middle with your parking lights on. It gets dimmer and dimmer. And what that means is you can only see 15 feet in front of you. And if there's a little covey of deer like just ahead, you're going to slam into them. And basically long-term planning is you turn the lights on. And in fact, it's recommended by all major government finance experts. And in fact, when a place goes broke, when a city is in danger of going bankrupt and the state takes it over with a financial control board, the first thing it does is require a multi-year, a 5-year financial plan so you can get an idea of how divergent your expenditures and revenues are going ahead. And so basically the idea is why wait until you're in trouble to start doing this? You should do it all along, and then it's a better way of avoiding problems that you don't have to run into.
Well, there was even a couple of, I think, Babylon and Ramapo that have taken information down off their websites. So
well, they don't put it up. I mean, two of the state's largest towns don't even post their budgets on the internet. I mean, the baseline is that most towns manage to put up some sort of crude, PDF version of their budget, just sort of slap it on down there, and then it often takes work to find it, but you can sort of find it and download it. Now, keep in mind, this is a technology available to everyone now. A 12-year-old knows how to do this.
Certainly.
And a 12-year-old knows how to generate a clean PDF, for that matter. And this is something that is basically telling taxpayers how their money is being spent. Well, 2 of the state's largest towns, Ramapo and Babylon, don't even post it on the internet anywhere. And if you call them, they say, well, if you request a copy, the clerk will provide one to you.
One asked for a FOIL.
Yeah, one wanted a FOIL request. So that's, at a certain level, although you want to avoid mandating different things by towns and counties, at a certain point, if they, really, I think it's really downright objectionable in this day and age for any municipality of any size, the tiniest little village in the state. Can post its budget on the internet and with big arrows saying, here it is.
What are they afraid of? I mean, if we go out 4 or 5 years, what is it that people will see that is so shocking? And
the most common, well, it's not shocking. The most common answer provided by local officials to this question is basically, well, people will misinterpret it, they won't understand it, and if we're wrong, they'll hold us accountable. Well, that's what comes with the territory. The most common refrain you'll get is when you say, you ought to project these things out 5 years. They'll say, well, nobody can predict the future. Well, we know no one can predict the future with certainty, but actually you can predict. It's not that hard to predict where your expenditures are headed if you don't change something. If you have 100 people working for a town, and 30 of them are police officers, and here's their salary grade, and here's their experience level, and here's what they cost. And that probably is, 75% of your budget, and the rest of it is, buying road salt and, paving materials and things, and part-time kids in the summer park. you can lay that all out and just project what the likely growth in that's going to be if you don't change anything. And on the other side, on the revenues, the easiest thing in the world to predict is a property tax. So even in Westchester, where the property tax administration is kind of screwy, it's easy to project
why do you
this
say
stuff.
that?
Well, I mean, like the assessment practices are kind of are inconsistent throughout Westchester and the lower Hudson Valley, and so and there are reassessments that may not make sense, and there are ratables that come on and off, and it tends to be more frequent down here than it is upstate. Or in New York City, which simply assesses everything to the absolute max based on its income stream. So that can lead to some complications, but basically it's relatively easy for local governments to project what their expenses and what their revenues are going to be. I think they just don't want to be bothered having to answer questions from people about what it all means. It's just another thing for people to be unhappy about and yell about.
Well, it's not pretty, honestly.
No.
We have Comptroller DiNapoli saying, last year 300 ran fiscal deficits, 27 don't have enough cash, even
Right.
under the mattress anywhere. John King, the Commissioner of Education, saying the state's most vulnerable school districts face educational insolvency.
Right.
So this is not a pretty picture.
No, I mean,
Are we going to see a bankruptcy, a municipal default this year?
Well, no, I don't. You'll never see a default in New York. Before any municipality goes bankrupt in New York, the state will impose a financial control board on it. And the tug of war in Albany now is between state officials, or basically the Cuomo administration, saying, call us when you're in trouble, and cities and counties and other municipalities saying, well, we've got trouble developing. We don't want to wait until it gets worse. We need your help
Right.
with
That's
relief
the
from
fiscal
some
stress.
loss. Right.
They're taking a pulse of
Right.
everything.
But to give you an example of what you can know from doing this correctly, the city of Yonkers, much to his credit, Mayor Mike Spano, the mayor of Yonkers, who took office about a year ago, I guess now, he has begun issuing a 5-year financial plan, a look ahead, and you can find it pretty easily on the Yonkers City website. And what it shows is that there's a huge growing gap between the city's recurring revenues and the city's recurring expenditures, and he's got a gap on the nature of, I think, $80 million or something in a few years, over the next few years. That's very significant money by Yonkers standards. And what that does is it helps people realize, or ought to help them realize, that they've got a serious problem and that business as usual can't continue. Now, it doesn't mean that, in the case of Yonkers, for instance, that the firefighters are offhand any more reasonable than they were before about renegotiating parts of their contract. But the first thing you've got to do if you're a municipality that's got financial problems, or a school district, is face the facts and let taxpayers know what the facts are, and make people understand that there's no easily getting around this.
Right. It's kind of our municipal therapy.
Yes.
We're hitting rock bottom here.
Well, that's it. You're hitting rock bottom. It's time to look in the mirror and see who you are and what you've done to yourself.
Right.
And it also is a way of avoiding another syndrome that municipalities and school districts can have, which is like the 1 year at a time kind of limping along, muddling through, which is you get some sort of one shot, you do something, you plunder your reserves, or you sell something, or there's some sort of windfall from the state, and you say, problem solved. And so what will happen is, typically in a school district, a school district will say, it's looking bad, we're going to have to eliminate, French class, or, we're going to have to eliminate all-day kindergarten, name it, name some program. There's a constituency for the program. And they will come to the school board meeting. For the only people who come to the school board meeting are people who've got a stake in something that's going on at the moment. And they will, really be upset, complain, no, you can't do this is horrible, how can you do such a thing? And the board will say, well, we have no choice, the numbers are what they are. And then say at the last minute, something will happen. There'll be a little extra state aid for some piece of pork that a legislator got or something. And everybody will go home and say, well, that's over. Now, if you have a multi-year plan, what you know is that not only is it not over, it's going to be worse in the next few years. And if you don't do this now, you're going to have to do something more later. That's, I think, what we need to have everybody understanding.
Well, I thought one of the points that you made in the report, I'll show once again, the concept of the disaggregation of the benefits, that the people, the stakeholders at the meeting should realize what is the cost of the past benefit, the present benefit, and the future benefit. And this all seems to get lost in the sauce. People seem to forget that we've promised something for people that aren't even here anymore, or may never even been in a classroom a day, or a
Well, I mean-
firefighter for the day. They're beneficiaries, and they're receiving a benefit or entitled to a benefit. And then we have what's happening now and what will happen in the future, which we're not committed to completely yet. So we have an opportunity to make changes there, and that's the conversation we really need to be having. So,
Well, right. I mean, one of the problems here is there's a peculiarity of government finance at the state and local level. A typical government budget has a line that says personal services. Go into your own local budget if you're at home, get your budget, the school
Right.
budget. It says personal services. That's wages. That's what's known as wages and salaries, and it includes overtime and bonuses. And that's a number, and that's a main part of the budget. And then, like in another section of the budget, below the line, are fixed expenses and overhead and other things.
Mm-hmm.
And down there is something usually that's no more particular than it says benefits. So, and the benefits are treated as like this other thing. And then the benefits don't even break out health insurance
Right.
from pensions, nor do they break out health insurance for active employees from health insurance from retired employees. And you need to break all those things out. If you're in the private sector, you're running a small business or even a larger business, and you face a decision on whether to, say, expand a particular unit of your business, and somebody says, we need 10 people to do this thing. Well, in calculating what the benefit would be from doing that, the person who runs or owns the business multiplies 10 times the fully loaded cost of a person. That is, they look at their employees and say the employee cost, the employee's salary, any employee overtime, the employee's payroll tax,
Mm-hmm.
which is like over 7%. Remember, actually it's a little over, close to 8%. The employee's benefit costs, all of the costs for the employees, what's called the fully loaded cost of the employee. You don't think of the employee just in terms of what their wages are. In the public sector, it's different. I mean, they treat benefits or particularly pension costs. It's like gasoline. Well, gasoline costs went up. What are we going to do?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I'm just going to stop you there. So Governor Cuomo has put something out called pension smoothing.
Right.
It said, you never know what the real word is, that this was a surprise to the comptroller at the state Cuomo speech when he announced this, but really is allowing municipalities to enjoy the gains now.
Right.
In the future, in other words, another way of borrowing forward. What's the impact if too many folks take advantage of pension smoothing?
Well, a word about how the pensions are done. And basically what the governor has proposed doing is he's basically saying to municipalities, if you don't like the weather, I will declare it changed.
Okay.
I mean, which actually can't happen. Here's how pensions work. Public pensions are pre-funded. That is, money is every year a percentage of all the employees' salaries is sent by your city or town or school district to a pension fund in Albany, which puts them in a big pool of money and
Right.
invests it.
Assuming it's going to earn 8%.
Assuming
also.
it's going to earn a particular return, and the math of in determining how much they need to have, they assume that they will earn 7.5% to 8% a year,
Right.
which in the last 10
It's
years
not in
hasn't
reality.
happened.
Okay.
They'll earn 20% one year, lose 20 the next, not to exaggerate too much, was their experience in recent years. So, but in any event, they put money in this fund. The fund has to earn a certain amount. Now, the funds got killed in the bear market of 2008 and 9. They're digging out very deep holes in order to get fully funded again.
Already,
Right.
even before the concept of
Oh yeah.
pension
Oh
smoothing
well, before
came
any of
along.
this comes, and the reason
Okay.
pension costs are going up is not because the pensions themselves are getting more generous. By the way, they are really generous, and that's why they're not free. But for a while when the market was booming, your municipality was putting almost nothing in the pension fund.
Right.
The so-called normal cost in a totally imaginary, hypothetical universe where the pension fund, where nothing happened, where history stopped, and where the pension fund simply went on smoothly earning 7.5% to 8% a year, that might be a number for like a non-uniform employee of like 11% a year, which would never actually happen. That's hypothetical. Well, it ranged from a low of near zero in the early 2000s to the current level of 16 or 17%, and it's heading to 20. Now, that's a really big jump in the space of a few years. So what the governor says is, well, I did this pension reform last year, and the pension reform is going to reduce the so-called normal cost of new employees hired after last year
Right.
to something like 6 or 7% of salary, assuming that the pension funds earn what they're supposed to earn over the next 25 years. And sometime in the second half of the next 25 years, all your costs will be lower. So tell you what, let's take the savings you'd be starting to pocket starting in, say, 2021, and in the 2020s and early 2030s. Let's take those savings and let's just assume we're going to save that much and take it all now and basically underpay the pension fund now. It's fiscally irresponsible. It's a way of borrowing from the future. It's a way of borrowing money from the future that you don't even know you have, that you may not ever earn.
That's right.
This is borrowing a savings you not only haven't pocketed, you can't be sure it's going to be there. So it's really fiscally irresponsible and unwise. And again, it's a way for the governor to basically purport, if you don't like the weather, I'll change it. But in fact, you can't change the weather. You can pretend, we can all pretend that it's changed, but in fact, it is what it is. And another added factor on top of all this is that never in the modern history of New York public pension funds have we ever had a so-called pension reform, a change in the pension benefit structure that hasn't been undone and enhanced within 10 years of being passed. I would also point out that the entire reason, almost 3/4 or more of the reason that theoretically, hypothetically, in the future, that so-called new pension plan, Tier 6, will quote-unquote cost less, is not because the benefits are lower. They're not hardly any lower at all. It's because employees will be contributing more to them, which they should have been all along, but which we gave them a pass on in a bill passed at the peaks of the market in 2000. So this is not a good time to be doing this. In fact, New York, compared to almost any other major state, by public sector accounting standards, which are very lax, and that's another question, but under lax public sector accounting standards, our pension funds are, quote unquote, closer to fully funded. Whereas, say, Illinois is practically insolvent, New Jersey is practically insolvent. That's because year in and year out, we always pay the fund what the fund says it needs. The governor's proposing, you no longer have to pay the fund what it needs. So I think that we're going to see that it can't happen unless the comptroller agrees to it. Hopefully he won't agree to it. He's being cagey on what he's going to do. The teacher retirement system has to agree to it also.
They hired a consultant.
And they hired a consultant to study the implications of it. Hopefully it just won't happen. If they do both take a pass, check off on this and say, we'll let it happen, there will be lawsuits, and I think there's a good chance that the lawsuits will block it because under the state constitution, it will be seen as shortchanging the pension fund.
Okay. While I have you here, compulsory binding interest arbitration, I believe, is up in this legislative session, and no one's talking about it. No surprise
hardly
there.
anyone. I'll blame myself for not making more of an issue of it, but I hope to now. In 1974, the state passed a law that said that police and fire unions representing police officers and firefighters, and only police officers and firefighters, had the right, if they were at impasse in their contracts, that either the employer or the union, and in all cases it's always been the union, can say, we're not making any progress, we want the state to appoint an arbitrator, an arbitration panel, a three-member arbitration panel, and the panel will decide what the contract's going to be and impose it on us.
Right.
Now, that's been a temporary law that's usually run for 3 years at a time. It's been renewed ever since then. It expires again at the end of June. That law, ask anybody in public sector labor on the labor or management side, will tell you has worked out really, really well for police and fire unions. It's the reason why starting firefighters in Yonkers make $70,000 a year, and why a typical cop, town, city, or county police officer in the Westchester or the downstate suburbs at mid-career is making over $100,000 a year, is because the arbitration has worked out really well. And
so if one municipality goes to arbitration and has a decision,
the others,
it sort of it has a ripple effect of everything surrounding.
And it has a ripple effect. Actually, it's a specter. It's like this shadow. Most contracts don't go to arbitration, but because there's a fear that an arbitrator will do worse, employers will agree to something they normally wouldn't have agreed to because they fear they'll get stuck with something worse. So 2/3 of the contracts won't even go to arbitration. But the employers will look at, say, and see some crazy generous deal done in, say, Clarkstown, and say, oi, if we do this, they're just going to go to arbitration, say, cite Clarkstown as a comparable, and impose on us a deal we can't afford. And arbitrators continued through the fiscal crisis and the worst recession since the 1930s to award unaffordable pay hikes. Now, the governor has proposed, the governor totally controls this. This law can't be extended without his cooperation.
Really? Okay.
the legislature won't pass it over his veto. I mean, that's just tradition, and that's fixed. That's not going. It wouldn't happen if he didn't. So, anticipating that he's going to find pressure to do something, he proposed, as part of the budget, although it has nothing to do with the budget, actually, modifying arbitration slightly and capping compensation increases, wages and some other benefits, under the awards, in arbitration awards, at 2% a year, which is the starting point of the tax cap. However, he proposed this only for, quote unquote, distressed municipalities. If your police and firefighters haven't succeeded in making you feel distressed yet, you don't get it. Which is, the first question is, well, why not? I mean, it basically, it should be for everybody. Also, the governor's memo, at least, to go with this bill, says that they would exclude so-called step increases. So police officers who are climbing and firefighters who are, every added year they get a longevity step, so well, that wouldn't be included in the pay cap. Basically, what the governor proposed is, like several other proposals the governor's made in this area, is like his own so-called pension reform last year. It is better than nothing. And it's kind of designed to have the municipality shrug and say, well, it's better than nothing. But it's not nearly as good as it could or should be, I think, given the fact that this is a governor with the highest approval ratings in recorded history, which means he's got a lot of political capital to spend, who controls this issue because there can't be any extension of arbitration unless it's on terms he wants.
And the thing that I found interesting looking into this was the definition is an ability to pay for that municipality. And to just go back to your first point about the long-term budgeting, how the ability to pay is determined is some archaic, I don't know how you even put that into a description, but it really should be on this long-term budgeting what a municipality's ability to pay if they can afford this in the next 3 to 5 years, which many of them cannot.
Ideally, there shouldn't be any compulsory arbitration at all, frankly. Okay. I mean, in fact, ideally, at a minimum, it should have been suspended for the next 4 years with a study to determine whether they'd reinstate it.
Okay.
Police and firefighters wouldn't like that, but, they're not supposed to. I mean, of course, it's not going to be as lavish for them. But I think that the so-called ability to pay standard was generally, in the past, it was treated as, you do have ability to pay because you can raise taxes, so you have an ability to pay. And it was based on the inadequate information people have about budgets. But even where, if you look at a budget and say, well, your budget's, here's the perverse way it'll work also. And I know people involved in arbitrations who pointed this out. In fact, there's somebody involved in one right now. You'll have an arbitrator looking at a municipality's budget and saying, hey, you've got a reserve fund. So a municipality's done a really good job of prudently running itself, being very careful. They built up a reserve to help them get through tough times. Well, the union will say, hey, you've got X million dollars in the reserve fund. That can be used to cover what we need, or you don't need a give back from us. And the arbitrator will say, they're right. You've got money, you've got an ability to pay.
The reason for a reserve is for a rainy day or for unforeseen circumstances.
The basic problem here is, at the end of the day, the people you elect to manage things ought to manage things.
Right.
And they ought to be unelected or elected based on how well they do that, and not have things imposed by unelected people who never run for anything, under a system that can be too easily gamed and favor the workers' side.
Let's move to the 800-pound gorilla, Medicaid in New York State. I actually jotted down a couple of things the last time I heard you speak, so we'll see if is this still true. We in New York, we spend more than California and Texas combined. Is that true?
No, Texas and Florida combined.
Okay.
California has now gotten big enough, so that's
how does that
true.
happen?
Well, I mean, here's how it happened. First of all, Medicaid was basically invented here. A full year before it was started under Lyndon Johnson, we had our own Medicaid program, which was very, very generous. We have a unique system in New York in which up to half of the non-federal share of Medicaid costs is paid for by taxpayers on the county level.
Right.
Or in New York City, which is like 5 counties rolled into one. What that meant is that legislators in Albany could make decisions on the generosity of this program based on knowing that they weren't paying more than a quarter of the cost. So in the program's inception, they were basically giving away $1 at a cost of 25 cents. So there's split accountability, split responsibility. That's the key to it. It started out very generous. I just was reading a book the other day about the history of this, where how generous it was and how generous the eligibility levels were set way in the beginning, very high, in a phone conversation on the Speaker's dais in his Capitol involving the then Speaker of the Assembly, Governor Rockefeller, and Bobby Kennedy on the phone from Washington. And they just pulled this number out of thin air. I mean, now the feds are about to come back with a vengeance. They're going to start docking us possibly over $1 billion a year.
It's crazy. It's off the chart.
Yes.
I'm astounded by the number.
Well, they're finally, the feds have wised up and have decided that we can't be spending that much disproportionately anymore in some of the ways we've been doing it, which includes billing huge costs per patient in facilities for the mentally disabled, the developmentally disabled, billing basically a reimbursement rate that's many, many times the actual cost of housing these people and using that to subsidize the Medicaid.
So there's a real internal control and auditing issue within the state.
Well, that methodology was actually approved by the feds, who let themselves be ripped off for years. And then there are other things like, and Cuomo has tried to get at some of these things in the last few years, and I think he's going to try harder now. New York is famous for the ease with which people who are actually affluent can use various legal maneuvers to qualify themselves, or more often one half of themselves, their spouse, for Medicaid subsidized nursing home care, even though they're affluent and have lots of assets. And that has to be cracked down on. There have been recent controversies about our Office of Medicaid Inspector General too, and how effective it's been in chasing fraud. So these are all things that are going to have to be dealt with more urgently now, because as we sit here in late February, I think the governor is going to have to be putting out amendments to his budget, which are going to have to show at least a contingency plan for how he could deal with the loss of $1 billion in Medicaid funding in the year ahead.
Just in the quick couple of minutes that we have left, anything on mandate relief that you see in all?
Well, mandate relief is a term that's thrown around a lot, but here's what it really means. It's kind of a euphemism.
Mm-hmm.
70 to 75% of local budgets at the sub-county level, city especially, town and school district, are employee compensation. And what happened was we had this terrific, horrendous recession and financial crisis, a disinflationary tendency. There's no growth in revenue. People are stressed. And unlike, say, in a private sector, a company that has to deal with all this, localities don't have the flexibility to manage their labor costs, and they need more flexibility. And there's several key tweaks to the so-called Taylor Law. One of them is a better reform of arbitration. Another is a change in a law that requires automatic pay increases even when there's no contract settlement, which affects school districts. So that's the so-called Triborough Amendment. These are the things, when you hear talk about mandate relief, these are the things that really need to be done. And the governor so far is unfortunately not really pushing and strongly leading on that. And the legislature prefers, just to ignore it and to point in the governor's direction. Until those things are done, there's not going to be a significant relief of state mandated costs.
Okay. Well, EJ, thank you for coming to Peekskill today to tape this, and thank you for tuning in today to Insights. And everyone, if you want to get out your pen and paper, write to your senator or your assembly person and watch the tape today, make some notes, and let them know how you feel. You can do something about those tax bills. Really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.